Zeus stopped walking. His ears perked up, nose twitching in the cool morning air, as if something unseen had reached out and called to him. Gabriel followed the dog's gaze and froze. Through the curtain of trees, half hidden by vines and shadow, stood a cluster of old stone houses, structures that shouldn't have been there at all. He had walked these mountain trails for more than 20 years, herding cattle, mending fences, chasing strays, and never once had he seen anything like them. The buildings looked ancient, yet not ruined enough to explain why no one in the region had ever spoken of their existence. Zeus gave a low, uncertain bark, then began to move toward the houses with slow, deliberate steps, as if he knew something Gabriel didn't. Gabriel hesitated, studying the hollow windows that seemed to stare back at him. The air felt heavier here, quieter. Still, he followed his old companion deeper into the misty woods. He had no idea that what he was about to uncover had been buried for decades by powerful hands, and that his quiet life as a small-town rancher was about to change forever. 3 calves had gone missing overnight, and he couldn't afford to lose any more. The past few months had been brutal. Drought had dried the pasture, bills piled high on the kitchen table, and every sunrise brought a little more worry than hope. Zeus, his loyal partner for more than 8 years, padded along beside him, muzzle lifted, tracking something only he could sense. The trail wound between moss-covered rocks and oaks Gabriel had known since boyhood. His father had walked these same paths, and his grandfather before that. The land had been in the family for 3 generations, but never had times been this hard. He'd thought about asking the bank for an extension on the loan, though deep down he knew what the answer would be. For now, all that mattered was finding the cattle. Zeus suddenly stopped, sniffing the air more urgently. A chill crept up Gabriel's spine as his eyes caught movement between the trees, the faint outline of buildings half swallowed by the forest. Stone and timber walls, their roofs draped in green moss, their surfaces damp as if time itself had forgotten to move. "How the hell?" he whispered. He'd been through this stretch 100 times. How could a place like this exist here, unseen? Cautiously he stepped forward, Zeus staying close, tail low. The small clearing ahead revealed 5 or 6 structures forming what looked like a miniature village. Each was built from the same dark, unfamiliar stone. Their open windows yawned like empty eyes, watching. The silence was absolute. No birdsong, no wind, just the distant drip of water from the cliffs above. Gabriel reached out and touched the nearest wall. The stone was cold, far colder than the humid air of the morning. Solid, well-crafted, but wrong somehow. Preserved. Too perfect, as if the place had been abandoned yesterday, not decades ago. He pushed the door open. The wood creaked but yielded easily. Inside, the house was empty except for loose floorboards and faint marks along the walls. Deliberate, carved shapes he couldn't decipher. Zeus paced the room, nose to the ground, whining softly. That's when Gabriel noticed it. One of the floorboards was slightly raised, as if something underneath was pressing upward. He knelt, pried it loose, and found a dark opening below. The hole descended farther than his eyes could follow. He pulled out his phone to use the flashlight. No signal. The weak beam revealed a vertical shaft dropping at least 10 feet before vanishing into darkness. Zeus sniffed the air over the hole, letting out a low rumble Gabriel had never heard before. The dog wanted to go down, but something deep in his instincts kept him frozen in place. Gabriel exhaled slowly. "Not today," he muttered. He checked the rest of the place first. He stepped back outside and crossed to the next structure, larger with 2 front windows and double doors slightly ajar. He pushed them open and entered a wide room coated in dust. Faint outlines on the floor hinted at long-vanished furniture. Pale rectangles on the walls marked where mirrors or paintings had once hung. At the far end, a wooden staircase climbed toward the upper floor. Gabriel ascended carefully, the old steps groaning beneath his boots. Zeus followed, claws tapping against the wood, their echo unnaturally loud in the stillness. Upstairs were 3 small rooms. In the last one, Gabriel stopped dead. In the corner lay a neat stack of folded clothes. He stared. The garments were clean. No dust, no decay. Utterly out of place in a house supposedly deserted for generations. He reached down, touched one of the shirts. The fabric was dry, well preserved. But the style was old, from a time he couldn't quite place. Zeus began sniffing the pile frantically, then trotted to the window and let out a soft, warning bark. Gabriel joined him and looked outside. The dog's eyes were fixed on the farthest house, a smaller one, sitting at the edge of the clearing. Something about it looked different, heavier, more deliberate. Gabriel descended the stairs and followed Zeus toward it. The structure was built from the same dark stone, but with more intricate details around the frame. Symbols carved above the doorway, their meaning long lost but unmistakably intentional. They weren't decorations, they were warnings. And as the wind stirred the moss hanging from the roof, Gabriel felt the weight of the mountains pressing down on him, as if the earth itself was holding its breath, waiting for him to take the next step. The door to the smaller house was locked. Gabriel pushed hard, but the old wood refused to budge. Zeus grew restless, scratching at the base of the door, nose pressed to the ground. Tail stiff with unease, Gabriel circled around the back, searching for another way in, and spotted a broken window beneath a curtain of ivy. He climbed through, landing on a floor that smelled of wet earth and something else, sharp and metallic, that he couldn't quite name. The flooring was different here. Instead of wooden boards, the entire room was laid with heavy stone slabs fitted together with uncanny precision. In the center of the floor, one slab had an iron ring set into it, as if meant to be lifted. Gabriel crouched, grasped the ring, and pulled. The stone moved surprisingly easily. Beneath it wasn't a pit, but a staircase. A set of stone steps spiraled downward into a dim tunnel, faintly lit from below. Gabriel froze at the edge of the opening, staring into the glow that pulsed from somewhere in the depths. Zeus whimpered, pacing nervously. Then curiosity overpowered his fear. He took the first few steps, glancing back at Gabriel as if to say, "Come on." Gabriel inhaled deeply, his breath trembling. "All right, boy, we're doing this." The steps were carved clean and solid, built to last. The walls were the same dark stone as the houses above. But something about them looked disturbingly new. The tool marks sharp, recent, as if someone had been maintaining the tunnel. The light grew brighter as they descended, steady and artificial, coming from some unseen source below. After about 20 steps, Gabriel reached a long passage that split in two directions. The air was surprisingly fresh, a sign there was ventilation somewhere. Zeus took the left path, moving with more certainty now. Gabriel followed, his boots echoing softly over narrow metal rails embedded in the ground, the kind once used in old mining tunnels to move ore carts. The passage widened into a chamber hollowed out of the rock, its walls lined with tool racks and supply crates. Gabriel stopped in disbelief. The tools weren't ancient. They were new: pickaxes, shovels, electric lanterns. Even a small portable generator sat neatly against the far wall. Someone had been down here recently. He approached a makeshift table built from rough planks. Papers lay scattered across it, pages filled with numbers, quantities, and unfamiliar chemical symbols. He couldn't make sense of them, but one thing was clear. Whatever was happening here, it involved serious money. Zeus began sniffing a stack of burlap sacks in the corner, tail rigid. Gabriel stepped closer and lifted one slightly. It was heavy, filled with something coarse and granular. That's when he heard it. A metallic clang echoed faintly through the tunnel, followed by muffled voices. Someone was coming down the stairs. Gabriel's heart kicked into overdrive. He signaled Zeus to stay quiet. The dog obeyed instantly, ears flicking toward the sound as footsteps drew nearer. Two men were talking in low tones, their words bouncing off the stone walls, fragments breaking through. Shipments. Deadline. Dr. Mendez. Gabriel's stomach tightened. Whoever they weren't supposed to be here. He looked around frantically. There was no way out. The tunnel they'd used was the only entrance visible. Then his eyes caught a narrow gap behind the stack of sacks. Without hesitation, he grabbed Zeus by the collar and squeezed into the shadowy space just as two figures stepped into the chamber. Through a thin crack in the rock, he could see them. One man was tall, wearing dirt-stained work clothes. The other was shorter, dressed better, crisp jeans, boots that were too clean, and a clipboard in hand. The second man checked the sacks, scribbling notes as he spoke. "The next shipment needs to be ready by the end of the week," he said, his voice calm but cold. "The buyer's running out of patience. No more delays." The laborer nodded, rubbing the back of his neck. "We need more hands down here to speed things up. But too many people will draw attention." The man with the clipboard paused. "Then keep it quiet. Someone was spotted walking near the old houses this morning." Could have been that rancher from up the ridge. Gabriel's pulse froze. The laborer asked, "You mean that old guy with the dog?" "Mendez or something?" The other man nodded. "Gabriel Mendez. Owns the property next door. He's known for wandering the hills looking for stray cattle. Not a threat, but we'll keep an eye on him." The operation's entering its final stage. Gabriel's mouth went dry. They know my name. His mind raced. These weren't random trespassers. This was organized, funded, controlled. And from the way they talked, there were more people involved, maybe many more. The man with the clipboard flipped a page. "Dr. Mendez will be here next week for final inspection. Make sure everything's ready for transport." The two men began checking the equipment, the generator, the lanterns, the tools. The worker tested a motor while the man with the clipboard walked to a wider opening at the far end of the chamber. He called out to someone farther inside the mountain. A distant voice answered, echoing faintly through the dark. "We found another vein. Quality's even better than the last one." Gabriel's breath caught as realization dawned. This wasn't just some secret hideout. It was a full-scale illegal mining operation, hidden beneath an old ghost village. The sacks Zeus had sniffed earlier weren't filled with dirt. They were filled with ore, raw metal, heavy and valuable. And now Gabriel knew too much. The well-dressed man checked his watch. "We're done here," he said flatly. "I need to be back in the city before anyone notices I'm gone. Keep supervising and make sure no strangers get close to the area." Gabriel's stomach twisted when he heard what came next. "If anyone finds out about this operation before the final shipment," the man added coldly, "you know what to do. Protect the investment at any cost." The words echoed down the tunnel like a death sentence. The two men turned and started toward the exit, their footsteps fading slowly into the distance. Gabriel stayed perfectly still, waiting until the echo was gone before crawling out from behind the rocks. Zeus crept out beside him, tail low, relieved to move again. Now that Gabriel understood what he was looking at, the whole chamber made terrifying sense. Every tool, every piece of equipment was part of a carefully organized, illegal mining network. He moved toward the deeper passage where he'd earlier heard the rhythmic clang of tools. The sound was still there, faint but steady, mixed with muted voices. More people were working deeper inside, unaware that someone had discovered them. He had to know how big this was, and who was behind it. Gabriel began down the tunnel with Zeus padding silently beside him. The passage branched into multiple directions, each marked with crude chalk symbols. He chose the one where the sounds were loudest and crept forward. After several minutes, the narrow tunnel opened into a massive natural cavern, artificially widened and lit by hanging electric lamps strung along metal beams. Gabriel froze. Dozens of men worked in coordinated shifts, swinging pickaxes into walls veined with streaks of gold and copper. It was a full-scale underground operation, far larger and more advanced than he had imagined. Industrial-grade machinery hummed in the corners, ventilation ducts snaked through the stone ceiling, and narrow rail tracks ran toward other tunnels that disappeared deeper into the mountain. His throat tightened. How long had this been going on beneath his land? Zeus gave a low growl. Someone was behind them. Gabriel turned. A faint light flickered in the tunnel they'd come from. The sound of boots echoed closer, growing sharper. Someone was walking toward them, carrying a flashlight. Gabriel motioned for Zeus to stay quiet and backed away slowly, his heartbeat thundering in his ears. There was nowhere to hide. The tunnel was straight, no turns, no cover. The beam of light danced on the rock walls, closing in fast. He had only one option: move forward, into the cavern. He slipped inside, staying close to the shadows behind stacks of mining carts. Zeus followed, crouched low, moving with animal precision. From his vantage point, Gabriel watched the miners work, oblivious to his presence. Their helmets glowed faintly in the dust-filled air as they loaded carts full of shimmering ore. 3 separate tunnels branched off from the main cavern. One led deeper, one curved sharply to the right, and one sloped upward toward the mountain's surface. That one was his way out. He took a breath and headed for the ascending tunnel. The air there was cooler, moving steadily forward, a sign of an opening ahead. After a long, tense climb, he began to see daylight filtering through thick leaves above. Pushing aside the tangled vegetation, Gabriel emerged into a hidden clearing. The place was invisible from the old village, concealed by a ridge of rock and forest growth. Under several camouflaged tarps were piles of modern mining equipment, Drills, carts, fuel containers. Empty ore wagons stood in neat rows. A dirt road wound away into the trees, freshly carved and compacted, built for hauling heavy loads out without anyone seeing. Gabriel followed the road a short distance. The tire marks were new. Whoever was funding this had done it with military-level precision. Zeus's nose caught something under one of the tarps. He began pawing at a small stack of documents half buried beneath a canvas sheet. Gabriel crouched and pulled them free. Blueprints, detailed regional maps, including his own property. Red markings snaked across the pages, showing mineral veins stretching far beyond the current excavation site. His entire ranch lay within the next expansion zone. Gabriel's chest tightened. His land, his family's land, was next. He flipped through more papers. A schedule listed phases of acquisition, forced purchases of rural properties across the region. Notes detailed financial pressure tactics, credit denials, and accidental events to expedite negotiations. He froze. It wasn't coincidence. The bank trouble, the sudden drop in cattle prices, the neighboring farms forced to sell out cheap, all of it was orchestrated. The final page made his blood run cold. A list of local ranchers and farmers, each marked with their financial status and risk level. At the top of the list, in bold ink, was his name. Gabriel Mendez, Priority A. Beside several other names were notes: vehicle accident, equipment fire, missing livestock. Gabriel recognized every one of them. Tragedies he'd thought were bad luck. Zeus growled again, low and urgent. Gabriel looked toward the road. Movement among the trees. A truck approaching. He quickly folded the documents and stuffed them inside his shirt. "Come on, boy," he whispered. They darted behind a stack of covered crates, just as a white pickup rumbled into the clearing. Two men stepped out. Gabriel recognized one instantly, the same man with the clipboard from the underground chamber. The other was older, wearing an expensive jacket and carrying a leather briefcase. The two spoke as they walked toward the hidden tunnel. Their words drifted through the still air. "Transport schedule confirmed. The land values will triple once the acquisition's complete." Gabriel held his breath as they disappeared underground. He had only a few minutes before someone realized the papers were missing. And this time, they wouldn't just call it an accident if they caught him. Zeus seemed to sense the urgency and followed Gabriel without hesitation as they slipped away from the clearing. Gabriel chose the long route home, avoiding the abandoned village entirely. His thoughts raced as they moved through the quiet woods. What he had uncovered wasn't just an illegal gold mining operation. It was a deliberate plan to erase an entire rural community. Families who had lived in these hills for generations were being pushed out, one by one. He thought of his neighbors, people who'd sold their land in recent months for a fraction of what it was worth, claiming the banks had cut their credit lines or that the drought had ruined them. Now he knew the truth. The hardships weren't natural. They were engineered, the banks denying loans, the buyers offering impossibly low prices for cattle. Even the accidents that had destroyed equipment or barns, all of it had been orchestrated to crush small farmers until they were desperate enough to sell. By the time Gabriel reached home, the sun was setting behind the hills. He sat on his porch and looked out across the fields that had defined his family's life for 3 generations. His grandfather had bought this land with every cent he had. His father had built the family's reputation here, and Gabriel had spent his entire adulthood keeping it alive. Now all of it, every acre, every fence post, every memory, was threatened by people who saw only numbers and profit where he saw roots and legacy. He took the folded documents from his pocket and spread them on the table. Under the dim porch light, the maps came to life again, thick red lines marking gold veins running directly beneath his property. His land sat squarely on top of one of the richest deposits in the entire region. It wasn't bad luck. It was design. Zeus lay by his feet but stayed alert, ears twitching with every sound from the dark woods. Gabriel realized that his dog had sensed the danger long before he did. Animals had instincts humans often ignore. Zeus had been warning him since the moment they stumbled on that ghost village. Gabriel stared into the night, weighing his options. He could go to the authorities, but the documents mentioned ties to influential contacts. That meant protection, bribery, and silence. He could sell and run before things got worse, but that would mean abandoning everything his family had built and letting the same people destroy everyone else who remained. Then, one line in the papers caught his eye. It referenced previous successful regions. This scheme wasn't new. The same method, financial strangulation, forced sales, staged accidents, had been used elsewhere and had always worked. They had experience. They had power. And they didn't care who they ruined. Gabriel rose and walked to the fence line at the edge of his property. In the distance, faint porch lights from other ranches flickered through the trees, the homes of people he'd known all his life. Honest families, unaware they were pawns in a much bigger plan. Some had already lost their land. Others were still holding out, fighting against a threat they didn't even understand. That night, Gabriel made a decision that would change not only his own fate, but the fate of everyone in the valley. He wouldn't let greed destroy his community, no matter the cost. He would expose the truth and protect those who still had something left to save. When his eyes met Zeus's, he saw the same determination reflected back. The dog's silent loyalty gave him strength. If he was going to fight, he'd need to be smarter than the people who had spent years planning this. That night, Gabriel stayed up studying every document. He mapped out connections, phone numbers, names. He wasn't just a rancher anymore. He was a witness. And in his hands, he held proof of something powerful enough to bring an empire down. By morning, he had a plan. He drove to visit his neighbor, Sebastian, one of the most respected ranchers in the county. An honest man, strong voice in the community. If anyone could rally the others, it was him. Gabriel laid out the documents and told him everything. As Sebastian read, his calm expression turned to shock, then to anger. He confirmed what Gabriel already suspected. Other farmers had faced the same suspicious issues. Loans denied without explanation. Cattle buyers suddenly cutting prices. Machinery failing at impossible times. Now it all made sense. The two men agreed to call a meeting. Every farmer who hadn't yet sold their land needed to hear the truth. They decided on the old rural schoolhouse, abandoned for years but still standing, quiet and out of the way. The next afternoon, 16 families gathered there. At first, disbelief filled the room. Then, fury. Many admitted they'd received attractive offers to sell, offers that now looked like pieces of the same plot. Gabriel proposed going to the state authorities, but Sebastian warned him. Some of the names in the documents were tied to local politicians. Going straight to law enforcement might backfire. That's when Mrs. Constance, the oldest farmer in the group, spoke up. Her voice was thin but firm. My cousin works as a journalist in Raleigh. He's done exposés on this kind of corruption before. If we want to be heard, we take it to the press. Everyone agreed. Gabriel would be their voice. He would deliver the evidence personally to the city, but before leaving, he needed one last look at the village to see if the operation was still running and, if possible, to gather more proof. At dusk, he and Zeus made their way back through the woods, approaching from a different ridge. As they crept closer, Gabriel saw movement, lights flickering between the trees. The place was busier than before. Several pickup trucks were parked near the houses, men shouted orders, and machinery rumbled underground. They were preparing for the final shipment. Gabriel crouched low behind a fallen log, pulled out his phone, and began taking photos, faces, vehicles, license plates, anything that could be used later. Zeus stayed completely still beside him, eyes sharp. Then Gabriel overheard a voice that froze his blood. The older man's voice was calm but merciless as he gave his orders. Start tightening the pressure on the remaining landowners, he said. That rancher, Gabriel Mendez, is becoming a problem. If money doesn't convince him, then we'll have to use other methods. The words cut through Gabriel like a blade. Other methods. They were talking about arranging accidents. He realized they already knew about him. Someone had discovered he'd been watching. And now his life, and Zeus's, were in real danger. Gabriel waited until the men walked out of sight before slipping away, every step measured and silent. He knew these woods better than anyone. He used narrow, forgotten trails he'd walked as a child, moving swiftly through the trees until the ghost village vanished behind him. By the time he reached his truck, the sky had darkened to violet. He didn't stop. He drove straight through the night toward the state capitol, headlights cutting across empty highways, heart pounding with every mile. Beside him, Zeus lay silent, alert, as if he understood that this was the most dangerous journey of their lives. When Gabriel arrived at dawn, He went directly to the newsroom of Ricardo Sousa, the investigative journalist cousin of Mrs. Constance. Ricardo was sharp, seasoned, and skeptical. But when he spread the papers across his desk and saw the scope of what Gabriel had brought, his expression changed. "These are explosive," Ricardo murmured. "You didn't just uncover illegal mining, you uncovered an entire corruption network." The evidence was overwhelming. The maps, the schedules, the payment records, all pointed to a massive operation involving corporate executives, government officials, and local banks. Ricardo admitted he'd followed rumors of similar schemes for years, but never had proof like this. Within hours, he was on the phone with state prosecutors who specialized in environmental crimes and corruption. That entire day, Gabriel sat in a government office under harsh fluorescent lights, giving testimony after testimony. He described everything: the tunnels, the workers, the documents, the faces. The investigators pored over the maps, stunned by the scale of what they were seeing. By sunrise the next morning, law enforcement was ready. A coordinated raid swept across 3 locations at once: the Ghost Village, the company's headquarters in the city, and the private homes of those involved. Gabriel, under protective watch, stood nearby as news cameras rolled and dozens of suspects were taken into custody. He recognized the faces. The man with the clipboard, his name was Marcus Ferreira, operations manager for a major mining corporation. The older man, the one who had given the orders, was Dr. Henry Mendez, the company's owner. No relation to Gabriel, despite the shared surname. Both were arrested, along with several local officials and financial officers who had helped cover up the scheme. The investigation revealed the horrifying truth. The company had used the same strategy in at least 5 other rural counties, manipulating banks, sabotaging farms, and forcing families to sell land that had been theirs for generations, all for greed. When Gabriel finally returned home, he was no longer just a farmer. He was the man who had stopped them. The community welcomed him back as a hero. The state seized the company's assets and used the funds to help victims reclaim their properties. Dozens of families who'd lost everything began to rebuild. The illegally mined gold was valued in the millions. But what truly mattered couldn't be measured in money. For the first time in decades, the valley stood united. Gabriel was chosen to represent the region on a new Rural Protection Council, a group formed to prevent exploitation of small landowners. His courage had inspired others to organize, to trust one another again. 6 months later, on a crisp autumn morning, Gabriel walked the same mountain path where it had all begun. Mist drifted through the trees, sunlight filtering over the hills. Zeus padded beside him, his gray muzzle brushing the tall grass. The ranch was thriving again. The loans had been forgiven, the fences rebuilt, the cattle healthy. But Gabriel had found something deeper than financial peace: a calling. He had learned what it meant to lead, to protect, to stand up when silence was easier. At the edge of the woods stood what was once the Ghost Village. Now it had been transformed into a memorial, a stone marker engraved with the names of every family who had fought back. A reminder of what happens when ordinary people refuse to be broken. Gabriel stopped at the same spot where, months earlier, Zeus had first lifted his nose and sensed something hidden beneath the earth. He looked down at his old companion and smiled. "You knew before I did," he whispered. Zeus wagged his tail, eyes bright, the wind rippling his fur. Gabriel had learned something the hard way, that doing what's right often comes at a cost, but it's a price worth paying. He could have sold out, taken the money, disappeared, but instead he'd chosen to fight, and that choice had changed everything. The real gold, Gabriel realized, had never been in the ground. It was in the people, in their trust, their unity, their courage to stand together. Zeus barked once as if agreeing completely, and together they walked on, through the land that was no longer just his farm, but a living symbol of what a community could be when it refused to surrender.